tape recorder, and so that immediately gets plugged in by Carrie, downloaded, and is available. And then Arun is also recording us on the overall system. And the disadvantage and advantage of the overall system is that one has to speak into the mic. And that's great for the public, but I think it would be really disruptive for the task force when they're discussing, because the task force, you got to be passing the mic around. 'Cause you got, so we'll try both systems today and see which one works best. And today's meeting is really, called meeting to order, is really just a continuation of the last meeting with additional information and additional analysis. And it's clear from the thoughts you're all doing, everybody is spending the brains are churning. The brains are really working overtime thinking this through. And that's, I really appreciate it, and it's very good because, the deadline's looming. The council wants something by the 16th. So what I thought we could do today, after taking public comment, is give everybody a chance to do some of the work they've done independently since the last meeting, and also give Mark a chance to present the results of Haroon's analysis, which answers some of the questions you had at the last meeting. So after public comment, it'll take us a little while to get all of us up to speed on all the information, and then you can continue the discussion from last time, and we can make sure Robin's fully up to speed based on the chart you read and everything else. So if that works for everybody, we will go out to public comment. Does anyone in the public would like to address the task force on an item under their consideration? And if you wait for the microphone and then start, we'll take it from there.
Hi, Jeannie Anton. I have two things. One, when I see something like this sitting on the table, which is well written and all, but it says, I did find, I suspect, blah, blah, blah. I would like the person that wrote it to sign it so we know who is writing it, because it's not clear.
Okay. And I don't know either, Jeannie, so we'll find out.
Okay. And my second thing is, I know that this task force is not dealing with in-home rentals where somebody lives in the house, they're renting a room. Is there some way to move that piece of it forward so that the people that are hanging out there waiting to rent their one bedroom out can get going again? It feels like that's being held up with this process, and I understand, but it doesn't seem right for people that are, I think we all agree, the people that are just renting a room and living in the house as well don't have the problems that are being addressed here. So I'd just like to see that move forward soon.
Thank you, Jeannie.
Okay.
Anyone else like to address the task force under public comment? If you raise your hand, the room will give you the mic, and we'll take it step at a time.
Mine's real easy. Last week I was here.
Name first, please.
Oh, I'm sorry, Lynn Bonin. I've tried to get to most of the meetings.
Right, but since these are being recorded, it's the best way.
Oh, great. Who should I sing? Okay. Anyway, last week, all you talked about was how we were going to manage this and what was good for our property managers. And I never heard one thing from anybody about the possibility that maybe the city just didn't want to do this or it wasn't right for our neighborhoods. And I hope that is going to be addressed in the future. I didn't hear it last week. It didn't even come up. It was all about options. So I'm hoping that this gets addressed. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, Anthony Tersall. First, I've been coming to all the task force meetings, and I wanted to say it seemed like often when there's long-term negotiations, you sort of stipulate to what you've agreed to, and it seemed that 2 weeks ago, the task force had made significant progress. It sort of decided that parking and noise and garbage were all things that could be covered by the nuisance codes. I thought when Elk had led you through the Encinitas thing and you'd gone point by point, that you'd sort of come to a consensus about those issues. And then last week it seemed to be a step backwards because you were addressing all sorts of other alternative ways that seemed a lot more complex to accomplish the same thing. And I think there was a comment in the task force 2 weeks ago saying, when does a party become a nuisance? Well, when it becomes a nuisance. And so the idea with code is that if you have code that's easy to enforce, the person comes up and has an objective measure of whether there's a problem or not. And if you have code that says STRs can't have parties, then the person who's enforcing it, when they arrive, they have to say, are these short-term renters? Are these owners? Because one becomes a nuisance and one doesn't, because it's illegal for the short-term rental to have parties there, but how about if the owner's there? And I know there was actually an instance on our block where that occurred, where there was a report and it turned out it was the owners there. So we don't have different traffic laws for visitors than we do for local residents. So it seems to me you have code that's simple, easy to enforce, if you keep all these things sort of separate and you don't mix it all up, where you're saying, here's the rules for short-term rentals, here's the rules for something else, and then you don't have to have all these complexities of density, etc. You just address the fact that here's a problem, deal with it, no matter what the source. So just my idea is maybe go back to 2 weeks to where the task force had sort of gotten to consensus on those issues and approach it in a really simple manner. Thank you.
Thanks, Anthony. Anyone else? Very good. Thank you. Okay, now bringing it back to the task force. So I think two options. Have each of you bring the task force up to speed on what you've been doing and thinking, and then have Mark, or have Mark first give the answers to the questions from last week, and then bring it back to you, however you'd like to do it.
If he talks first, he might influence what we say, and we might get from point A to point B faster.
And answering some questions maybe
Yeah.
help. Okay.
Yeah.
Is that okay with everybody? Have Mark bring you up to speed on the answers to the questions from last week?
That's reasonable. I have a question for, excuse me, your name again? Lynn. I just wanted a quick specific. I think your question was important and pertinent, but I want to be clear if you were speaking about, could you please just in a moment review what you meant by not what you weren't seeing from last week?
Well, I didn't have a question, I just had a comment.
Statement, yeah.
And my statement was that what I heard last week, I didn't hear anybody address the fact that perhaps maybe this wasn't right for the city. All I heard is how we're going to manage the program, and it sounded like it was a fait accompli that the city was going to do this. And my comment was that I hope in the future you will discuss this option, unless I'm wrong, but I thought this was one of the options we were dealing with. I didn't know I thought it was something that we were talking about, that we were either going to do this, we weren't going to do it, we were going to do it with all these options and who's going to enforce it, blah, blah, blah. But last week I didn't hear anything about we're not going to do this.
Tom, do you want to address that? Because
I think, yeah.
the
Sure.
city council gave us direction on that.
Yes.
Oh, good, okay.
And I think it also addresses Jeannie's point a little bit too, although there's planning commission aspects of that too, and so Robin will correct me if I don't state it quite clearly. So let's go to the bigger picture in terms of what we consider short-term vacations rentals and the in-home sharing a room while the owners are still there. The council saw those as much different and asked that they go on different tracks. And then the planning commission, in its deliberations, felt that from what's right for the neighborhoods and what's right for the community, there are some commonalities between those two. So they really have asked that they both be addressed and brought back to the planning commission before they go to council. Did I say that fairly and accurately?
Yes, the Planning Commission was presented with a packet on homestays, and we felt it didn't meet our needs, and so there was no action taken.
Yeah. Now that's become further complicated because the council has said we'd like this task force to report back to the. Is that you or me?
That's not me.
Okay. Sorry. We would like the task force report back to the council on the 16th of December, and the planning commission won't have a chance to address any of this until the 17th of December. So it's a big mess, Jeannie, to answer your question. Yeah, not a good answer. But everybody recognizes that the two are different in many ways, have potential same impacts in neighborhoods, and that the poor people who are homestays are getting no attention on their issue and moving forward at all. I think we all recognize that. I don't have a solution for you at the moment, but it's a real problem. Now, in terms of Lynn's point, which is related, the council, in its most recent request of this task force, said, bring us back your recommendations regarding short-term vacation rentals, not the homestays, by the 16th. And before they said that, they heard an update from the task force that said, the task force at that moment, which was when at the first meeting when the task force addressed its norms, said we don't want at the moment to look at either extreme. We don't either want to preclude them entirely from PG, as has the county and Carmel and Monterey at this point, legally, even though they're happening in all three of those places. And we don't want to say that we're going to just proceed with the ordinance exactly as it is. We feel there are issues that need to be addressed, and the recommendations regarding those issues need to be taken to council. So, and this task force can always choose to change its norms and its tentative agreements, but at the moment, neither one of those two extreme positions is on the table. Where the task force ends up in the middle is totally yet not known. The task force hasn't a chance to address that yet. And Anthony's absolutely correct. The meetings have taken somewhat different tenors, and the task force has looked at one approach in one meeting and a different type of approach in a different meeting. But those are starting to narrow into either one or two or maybe more sets of options and recommendations to the council by December 16th. So, yes, sir.
I thought the council, at the last council meeting, that 5-2 vote, I thought that was decisive. We will have short-term rentals. Is that not final? Or
Yes, that's what I wanted to know.
Well, it's never final, but yes.
Yeah.
As far as this council is concerned?
Correct.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. Unless, if you come back to them and say, absolutely not, we should not have them, here are the reasons, and it's very rational, and they're not right for PG, then the council would absolutely, because they're looking for you to be their experts on this. But yes, maybe I didn't say it as clearly as I could. Their final direction to you was come back with recommendations concerning this program and how we move forward.
Thank you for the clarity, everyone.
There's a little more.
Great.
I know of no one on the Planning Commission who does not want to review the task force recommendations prior to submission to City Council. And in my opinion, that's a problem.
Now, so if the task force ends up really soon and the Planning Commission is willing to schedule a special meeting, I think we can do that. But we also know that most likely there's going to be an ordinance change, and if it involves the zoning code, it has to go to the Planning Commission. So my guess is that no matter what happens on the 16th, the Planning Commission is absolutely going to have a key role in this. But the timing has gotten all mixed up. You're absolutely right.
Thank you.
So with that clarity, and
Now we're stepping in.
so Mark, if you could share with us the answers to the questions from last week and the work that's been done in the interim.
My voice doesn't project out well. First of all, what I'd like to do is I'd like to just explain what some of the exhibits are up here on the wall. This is an exhibit.
Robin, Mark, why don't you hold on a sec so Robin, you can turn around and see. Thanks.
What we did is we created a couple of exhibits for our own volition so that we could see how some of this was starting to look. One of the things that we determined is that when you lay out about 300 or 260 circles or radiuses, that when the circles meet, there's spaces between.
You have to move your hand down and then talk right into the very top.
Like this? Okay. I'll use my other voice. So when you use circles, there's spaces between the circles. Circles don't work. Only grids do. Because grids tighten up with one another. So I had Haroon develop a matrix for me, or a grid, showing 260 dots on the map that identify the corners of the grids. And you can see how it gets spread across the city. And, well, that's all I want to say about that, is that that's what it looks like. So that's where 260, this is where we'd create grids. So the grid would be 4 lines connecting the 4 dots, and inside the grid would be the question of whether we have more than one TUL in that unit, in that grid. So then we thought, well, let's take it a step further and overlay the existing short-term vacation rentals on the grids. And we found that there are several places where there are more than 1, sometimes as many as 6 or 7 inside one of the grids. So we started to look at that, and that's when I started thinking to myself, how are we going to manage a program where if we say you can only be 1 house inside the grid, what happens to the other 4 houses that aren't in the grid? And the only way I could think of the solution was, one was a recommendation by Councilman Miller that we would have badges similar to taxi cabs. And the most, I guess the highest bidder for the badge would be the 1 unit inside the square. And I thought to myself, well, what's that going to create? Well, what that is going to create, it's going to create, number 1, a bidding war. And most likely the most successful bidders in that bidding war will be the largest houses because they have the most to gain. So if I have a 5-bedroom and Robin has a 2, I can outbid Robin because I know what my income's going to be over the year. So if Robin bids $2,000 for the badge, I can bid $5,000 because I'm going to make that back in my first month of business. So it creates sort of this potential inequity. Yeah, can you turn the sound down because I'm getting feedback? Is that what it is? It's feedback? So I thought to myself, okay, what's the next solution? The next solution would be a lottery. 4 properties inside the grid would get put their property address or whatever, get put in a hat. We pull out one. Now let's go.
No, it's back.
It's back. So then we would have 1, and 1 lottery. And what that creates is it creates 4 losers. And I thought to myself, do I want to create a class of losers in a program that perhaps 1 or 2 or 3 of those properties have been shining examples of how to handle a TUL? I mean, there was no noise, they've never had a complaint, they've been playing by the rules, they've probably made substantial improvements to the property. They've invested in the property to bring the property up to, I call it global standards, because they have to compete with everybody else. So that's when I created the thing that doesn't have my name on it, that says clustering of multiple units. I wrote this. This is just my thoughts. This was nothing more than putting down my thoughts on paper. And what I did is I called the American Planning Association in Chicago, Illinois. And I asked them, I said, this is the issue. This is the 2 solutions. Who has done this before? Durango, Colorado was the only city that they could recommend. Durango, Colorado has actually had a program in place. And what they did is they did not create a class of losers. What they created was a separate class of sub-winners. And it gets and what I'm going to start by saying is it gets very complicated. It gets very complicated. So just to identify the 7 things is, number 1, the property would have to be located within a commercial and multifamily zoning district. We wouldn't allow the sub-winners to be in R1 districts. That's what Durango did. So if you were a commercial zone or an R3 or an R4, you could have as many as 4 or 5 or however many in that grid, but you'd have to meet a whole bunch of new requirements that the winner wouldn't have to. The property would have to be limited to a total of 150 rental days. not 365 like the winter. All parking would have to be accommodated on site. If you can't provide parking on site, sorry, you're out of the program. All parking, the owner agrees to have the property professionally managed. That would be a requirement of this sub-level. They do not have any existing complaints on file. That, I think we'd all agree to that one. We'd hold a zoning administrator public hearing noticing all the property owners in the area. And the conditional licenses would be part of the 260 total that we have. So this is the 260 total, so it would be part of that. All to say, and I'm coming back around to sort of what I guess my recommendation is that you have two choices here. You either just go with the 260 cap and you just let them happen where they happen, and you allow them to cluster in areas that have been historically the most popular areas, or you try to surgically identify a second class of winner, and that is the second class of winner. So if you were in this grid right here, this guy's the winner of the lottery, and he only has one other property. Well, actually, there's 3 or 4 other properties in this grid. The only way they'd be able to play is by these new set of rules. So I just want you to consider that. I think that's one of the conversations that we need to have. The first conversation we need to have, I believe, is this. Do we simply place a cap, or do we place a cap with distance and proximity rules? And if we do go with the proximity rules, do we then create a group of, I'll call it sub-winners, that have this they have what I call a conditional TUL license. Not a TUL license, a conditional license, and they'd have to meet all of those conditions. That's what the city of Durango did, because everybody in Durango wanted to be downtown. They didn't have a beach. Everybody wanted to be downtown. And when you looked at their TUL map, it was so dense that when you went onto their website, it only looked like they had 5 until you zoomed in. And then 5 zoomed, literally became 80. And they were all within their 5-block downtown area. So they created this sort of sub-district. Okay, so that's one thing that I want you to think about today, is whether we go 260 with radius, and 260 with, I'll call it, conditional licenses for the ones that are clustered into type. What I do want to do is I want to just reiterate where I think we had some agreement, and I have pictures of all these. I took pictures of all the butcher blood, so I was referring to that when I did this. The first one was to place a limit of 260 total number on the short-term vacation rentals. Determine a separation distance with 260 as a cap. Separation works better the maximum number of times a year the property can be rented. In other words, rather than just saying I'll use San Francisco as an example. If you don't know this, San Francisco limits the number of nights that short-term rentals can be rented in a year to 90. We don't have any of that. We haven't talked about that. That is not something that we've brought up. There was no direction given on the 1 per property metric, and I think that's one I'd like you to revisit today. 1 per property would prohibit a condominium complex, an apartment complex, a duplex, or a triplex from having more than 1 unit in each one of those building types, a TUL. And I will mention to you that at the Planning Commission this week, we have the Holman Building, which is going to have 25 condominium units in it. And consider that. Would you want to see that whole project turned to TUL, or would you want to have a number of, would you want to allow 1 per property, or would you allow something different? So I think that's something we need to revisit today. The direction you did give us was raising the TOT on all 12%, not just hotels and not just TULs, but hotels, motels, TULs. Raise everything to 12%. We also agreed that if we received 2 verified complaints, the next step for that property was to require professional property management, or they lose their license. We agreed to require garages and driveways be made available to the renter. So you can't live in seaside, have your second home here as a TUL, and have your boat, your RV, and your garage filled with stuff. If you're going to have a TUL, you got to make your garage and your driveway available to people renting. There was a recommendation to create an STVR board, similar to other boards and commissions, that this would somehow morph into something, maybe maybe you hear complaints, or maybe you decide whose TUL gets pulled or what license gets pulled, but there was a suggestion on that. A suggestion to require a 300-foot notification to neighboring residences, and suggested an open house. So we would send a letter, the 300-foot radius, or again, probably a 300-foot grid, and we would request that the person having that would hold an open house. We suggested that we maintain the 30-minute response time requirement, that we don't extend that we contract out the house inspections to private, not allow them, take the city out of that and allow contract inspections. Request an appropriate level of insurance, and I'm still not sure what the answer is to that, but maybe somebody here can address that later on in the meeting. And I put in large letters, no parties, that if you're going to have an STVR, it's a special license. And as a special license, you can attach any type of additional requirements to you. And I believe that we had a broad consensus that one of them is that there's simply no parties, wedding receptions, or those things held at the STVR. And there was no decision on enforcement. Whether we require a deposit, a 2 strikes you're out, a special one-time phone, one special phone number, and an online one-stop shop. We're already working on an online one-stop shop in the department, so we're there, and we're going to have phone numbers for contacts. So the ones I'd like you to consider today are, if we're going to enforce, do we require a deposit, and that if you have 2 bona fide complaints, that you can sign up to have a professional property manager, and if you don't, you can, or your license gets pulled. In other words, if you get 2 complaints bona fide, we go out and check them and they're bona fide, you lose your license. You lose your right to have that license. And I think that's the way I've kind of looked at this, is that having a license here is a privilege. It's not a right. And I think that's the way the city council sees this as well. So when we talked about this, they see this as a privilege, and that if we want to attach things like no parties, then we can say that, because it's a privilege. So I'll stop there, and I'll turn it back over to the committee, and you can discuss the 3 or 4 items that I believe that still need some vetting, or allow you.
Yeah. Next step is for
the committee.
Unless you have questions of Mark.
Bring back some things
So
that they have.
I have a question.
Sure.
Thank you.
When we, at the last city council meeting, Dave Laredo said that if we apply any restrictions to short-term rentals, that we also need to apply them to long-term rentals and to permanent residents. Did I understand that correctly? And if so, how many of these could be applied across the board?
Okay, so number one, I'm not an attorney, so for me to give legal advice would be
Right.
However, I believe you interpreted what he said more broadly than he actually said it.
Okay.
There are certain things that are basic First Amendment rights, property rights, contractual rights that we can't violate. So, for example, we can't say to someone, you can own only one short-term vacation rental in the city of PG. That's a violation of property rights. They can own additional properties. However, since short-term vacation rentals are a different, it's not really a use, but a kind of a subclass of use, there can be restrictions unique to short-term vacation rentals, unique to long-term rentals, unique to some other type of use within the residential zone. So what he said doesn't apply across the board. It's not as though there can be no restriction unless it's applied evenly to all rental units, but clearly certain ones, yes. So
And he would have to advise us which ones.
correct.
Okay.
If I'd like to comment on that, if I may. We talked to two of our land use attorneys before we even looked into short-term because we wanted to see if it was a viable option for us. And the notion and that understanding, I'm thinking I may provide that letter, but I wanted to check with him first because it is a privately contracted letter, is that short-term and long-term rentals are indistinguishable in the big law, the land federal law. So there's a lot of protection surrounding long-term renters in the state of California. So if they didn't want to leave, I won't get into the details. It's very different for short-term renting. You can have somebody in and out quickly. I mean, Jan, you probably know this as well. So there's similarities and there's differences. And my understanding from when we did our homework and our research was that, yes, they have to be treated in the same manner. But you don't, long-term rental houses, you can kind of let go fallow a bit because you're not advertising them you're advertising to a different group of people that would want amenities. So that's from my perspective, my understanding.
Okay, thank you.
I do have a question.
Sure, especially since this is, yep.
And I listened to see if it came up. We have 260 repeated twice.
Mm-hmm.
I want to know how we came up with 260, the number of short-term vacation rentals, and then the distance of 260.
I do too.
Actually, those are much different. So I think the 260 originally came from some calculations, Tom, that you did, if you wouldn't mind repeating those.
Yeah, the concern was, we know we have a problem at the current level. So why would we want to increase that? And the radius is that the city had applied to figure the city. We went to capacities of closer to 400. But that's more than we have now. So why would we want to increase a problem we know we have now?
Mm-hmm.
So looking at the current numbers, we have 190 permits, legal permits. We have, I think it was 12 pending, so that brings us to 202. There were 58 last year that have been dropped, either because, don't know why, but assuming that the place is sold or the people changed their minds or something happened that they're no longer, they did not renew those licenses. So looking at basically a 12-month period or a little longer, there have been 260 people interested in having these things.
Mm-hmm.
So it seemed to me that's a fair cap. It just seemed to me, because that's what we have now. We know that level's a problem. So if we're going to have regulations, let's work on the problems we know we have. Did not expand the problem or anticipate problems.
Let me
I
just
have a
add one
question,
thing.
yeah,
So
for that.
so that was a number to test. It wasn't as though the group in your absence said 260 is it. It was, let's get another metric out there to see what the implications of that are. So is that representing what you also?
Yes,
Okay.
absolutely.
I would
Annalisa.
I have a question. Very astute statement, but I need it defined. I need a definition of we. We find that these numbers are a problem because from my perspective, and from speaking to the police chief, from looking at the data, from talking to neighbors, from doing my individual homework, I'm getting a very different message than that this is a townwide problem, that it's an issue. And everybody deserves their perspective here. So I I just need it termed who's we, and how is that the norm? Because it's important that we hear you, but to say we means that that's a town belief, because we're coming up with a number. I mean, to me, 300 seems like a reasonable number, and I just wanted to address that. I think it's important that We say we as a group of 10 people that feel concerned, or we as a group of 50 people that feel
I
concerned.
can't tell you an exact number. In the city council meetings since this has been going on, there have been any number of people who've come in to tell their complaints.
Yes.
There have been any number of people who've written them. I can't give you an exact number. But the night that they decided to impose a moratorium to take a serious look at this was the night when people from 4 different neighborhoods came in with stories identical to mine. It's not
Agreed.
just our block that's been overrun by this. It's other places too. And so we all had very similar stories and complaints.
Yes.
And so that got a moratorium and to take a look at. We're still in that, moratorium's been lifted, we're
Yeah.
still in the look-at process. So there are enough people that have brought this forward to believe that there is a wider complaint than one person or me
Yes.
or any individual, and it's more widespread than any single area. It's, as Mark just said, there's clusters in these areas down here of 4, 5, 6, I think you said.
Yeah.
So that would be, my biggest concern was the clustering.
Yes.
So with that, what they found from this grid, we could figure out how many places that is. And I don't know, and whether everybody in those neighborhoods are, but I don't know. Many people are and have said so.
Thank you
That's we.
for that. Yes, so that we can clarify. And then I had a question
So
for Jan.
as you spoke, Tom, I maybe heard 2 different we's. There's the we in the city of Pacific Grove, in the entire community that currently has 190 permits and 12 pending. So that's the broad we. Then I also accept the fact that you're speaking of another we, which may go to the point that Annalisa mentioned. But I heard it as we, the entire community of Pacific Grove.
Right. And it's we who have come forward so far to explain why these are impacting our homes.
Excellent.
And
Thank you for
and
that
I'm guessing that's
distinction.
30 or 40 people at this point. But I
And
really,
very hard to determine, absolutely.
yeah, I really haven't counted. And unless it goes to the ballot, you're never going to know exactly.
And was the 260 separation distance an arbitrary number or
Okay.
an educated
So,
number?
Mark and Haroon had originally looked at a 200-foot radius and a 300-foot radius. Based on Tom's analysis and what the group asked Mark and Haroon to do last week, it was a totally different use of a number. Instead of being a foot radius, it's how many in the community if they're relatively equally spaced. Whether that's by radius, by grid, whatever else. But the 4 without you present didn't even agree that they necessarily do need to be equally spaced. Clearly, that's an issue that's still on the table, needs to be addressed. So in fact, some of us, and I know I do, we need to be careful when we say 260. What do we mean? Is that the radius? Is that the total number? Are we looking for an overall cap? Are we looking for a density cap? Those are still open issues.
Thank you.
So, when we received Mark's proposal, the one that all of you guys have in front of you, the clustering of multiple units, I responded to Tom and Mark on that, and I'd like to read my response, if that's possible.
And did you bring copies today, or did Mark?
No.
Did you bring copies today?
Mark, did you bring copies of what I sent you?
No, I didn't.
Okay.
Okay. So I'll just go ahead and tell you what I'm saying.
Oh, and I'm sorry, may I interrupt? And I apologize for interrupting. But I did not distribute to the group for a reason that I shared with Alka. Information is one thing, but when we get to the point of saying what now I believe as based on information, I don't think we should be sharing that
Right.
outside the meetings, because then we start getting problems. So
Right.
I was not able to share what.
Okay. So Mark's proposal concerned me greatly. And the first reason was because I don't think the proposal is written in the spirit of the middle ground that we are all trying to achieve, starting with the term lottery losers. It presumes that placing a cap on the number of short-term rentals necessitates a density regulation. In fact, most cities, the majority of cities, do not impose a density regulation. And if there are folks who are adamantly in favor of density regulations, be assured that there are folks who are adamantly opposed to it. Number two, at no point have we as a task force decided that placing a cap on the number of short-term rentals necessitates the elimination of the licenses in high-density areas. At no point have we as a group determined that to be the case. And I think that's what Mark's proposal presumes, that somehow we need to establish a density rule. Number three, the proposal of no conditional short-term rental licenses are allowed in any of the 5 R1 districts would virtually eliminate many of the short-term rentals in Pacific Grove. So suddenly you would end up with maybe half of the short-term, the 190 that are licensed. You probably have that, because if you start eliminating from the density areas, that's what you're going to end up with. So that is far from what we have been discussing as a reasonable compromise, and it also reduces the much-needed transit occupancy tax that is benefiting the city of Pacific Grove. And, on that, I just have to say this. We are a family. Some of us live here permanently, and some of us have a second home here. But we are like a family that has brothers and sisters and aunts and uncles that live far away, and they come back to visit every now and then, but we don't eliminate them from our family, especially if they are helping pay for mom and dad's long-term care. So we do not want to eliminate them from our family. A family has to accept everybody, whether they live right here or they don't, because everybody's contributing to the family's existence. Like in my family, my brother and I decided that I would be the one to take care of my mother's long-term care as she aged, and he would take care of my father's long-term care as he aged. And then both of us together take care of my older brother because he needs a lot of help. So this is how it works in my family. We don't always agree. We don't always agree on how each of us should be taking care of everybody, but this is how it works so that we all are taking care of the family, and the family is important. The fourth item is that since many of the smaller short-term rentals in the historic district have never had parking on their properties, they should be exempt from the conditional license as a legal non-conforming property, because this is how ordinance changes are normally handled. There's no way that the small Methodist tents that were established in PG at the very beginning, there's no way that they can have a parking added to them. So they should be grandfathered in as a legal non-conforming and be allowed for their status, their short-term license. Now, Tom, you keep saying that there are 7 short-term units on the 200 block of 18th Street. I live on the 200 block of 18th Street also. So I have been taking photos this entire week at different times of the day and different days of the week. I've been taking photos of what the street looks like and how much of a disturbance is being caused on the street. That is what all of these are. These are taken, for example, on Thursday at 10:27 a.m. Here's something on Friday at 6:38 p.m. Here is Saturday at 10 a.m. and here is Sunday at 5:11 p.m. Here is Tuesday, November 17th at 4:24 p.m. Here is Monday, November 16th at 4:56 and at 12:30 p.m. There is plenty of parking on the street at all times. There was never a time when there wasn't parking on the street. Did I hear a lot of people dragging wheelies, their wheelie cases down the street? Yes, a couple of times, and they all walked down to the Gosby house, which is at the end of this block. Did I hear kids on the street talking to their moms as they got out of their cars? Yeah, I did. And guess what? Those are the permanent residents. There are long-term renters or permanent residents who live on our street. So if the the block that Tom is most adamantly complaining about, the 200 block of 18th Street, is the most problematic block, or one of the most problematic blocks. And we are not seeing the evidence of that in this photo essay. Then I am wondering why we are making such a big deal about imposing this regulation on everyone, on every single short-term unit. Number 5, the smaller short-term renters are not, short-term rentals are not the bad actors. Mark has repeatedly pointed out that the bad actors are the large houses with people that have more than 6 to 8 guests. So I think at our task force, we have already agreed on some of the points. And Robin, last time when you weren't here, we agreed that we could limit in the larger houses, we could limit, we could live with either a 6 to 8 cap of guests on the larger houses. And I'd like us to discuss that cap. Because I think that the more people you have in a rental, the more problems you're going to have with parties. And I think Jan pointed this out, that you don't allow any parties at all in any of your property management.
We don't allow any, it's true. Not to say that there haven't been some, because there have.
Right.
I broke up one not too long ago, and I said to the person who rented the house, "Did you read that email I gave you that said no parties?" And he said, "Yes." Okay.
Yeah.
So they do happen.
Yeah. So, and then the last point I wanted to make was that I'd like to propose that we give the regulations that as a task force we can agree upon, give them a chance to work for at least 6 months before imposing more regulation that is difficult to enforce, that will take more money to enforce, and may not pass the litmus test of, if we impose this on short-term rentals, can we also impose this on long-term rentals? So that is, those are my comments on what the proposal that Mark.
Other
Thank you.
members, can just let me say it, and then Tom. I want to make sure we use this time for all 5 of you to share what you thought, what you've done in analysis, what you've learned since the last meeting. So Tom.
Just in a little rebuttal, it's a shame you didn't take pictures, anytime after 4 o'clock on Thursday and get the 3 trucks in 1 car that appeared for 1 short-term rental. 7 men who went in it with mostly 6-packs and bags from a grocery outlet. They were there the next day. 2 women in a car joined them, so we had 3 trucks and 2 cars. Not all on our street because there wasn't room. A lot of them were around on Laurel where some of the residents were parked. And then on Saturday there was some change up, but they ended up with 3 trucks and 1 car. That's all at one house. There was a family that showed up with an oversized truck with carriers on the back and 2 kids. Those were the kids biking up and down the street and shouting all weekend. I don't know if you saw them or not.
Never heard them.
We were quite aware of them. We know the 2 neighborhood kids you're talking about, and they can be noisy, but there's just 2. And they were down there. I didn't notice anything unusual about them. But those are the only 2 children who live on that block. The others all come with the vacation rentals. Now this is winter time, so it was a fairly quiet week on that block because it was cold. There were not a whole lot of rentals. Even your husband been here for a week in your house, which is, well, get out of that. But I'm just saying that the impacts were there Thursday, Friday, and Saturday nights, and I'm sorry you don't seem to have pictures from there. So it depends on when and where you take the pictures, whether they mean anything. I think I can stop right there. I mean, I'm not...
If we were to impose these limits on the number of guests in the house, would that help some of the issues that you're talking about this Thursday, Friday, Saturday? Because we didn't hear them where we are, so I understand that you did. I get that.
The problem with that is if you want that 6-month test, this whole thing right now drops dead at the end of June. If we're going to have a 6-month test, then 6 months from now we're back in the same spot. But what do we do with it now? Now, if the city wants to do that, that's the city's decision. I'm not sure that would be the best service we can do for the city government, but then that's up to them. But I've said, I think, probably from the beginning, that if the clusters were broken up, it would help. If you live right next door to one, you're going to feel the biggest impacts with the one right across the street. Not everybody objects, and not everybody complains. Some people are impacted, others don't feel that. That's why we go back to, I think, a very important part is advance notice and give the neighbors an opportunity to object to the idea. There may be things going on that the city does not know about. The fact that these were issued without checking with the neighbors in the first place, I think is a problem. I think it does, well, I'm not a lawyer either, but our city zoning code does prohibit rentals for less than 30 days. That's our law. The city has issued some one-year licenses to make exception to that, and those are discretionary. So those, I believe, if I understand all the legal talk, can have all sorts of restrictions on them. It's like your driver's license. If you don't like the terms that come with the permit, you don't apply. That's easy, and I'm not sure. Again, if the city thinks it's in their interest to try some changes for 6 months, I leave that to the city. Seems to me then we're just right back here in 6 months, and we got nowhere.
Okay.
Okay, yeah,
Jan?
both. Yeah, I've talked, so you ladies, please.
Jen, please.
I had a really great opportunity last night to meet with the residents of the 1000 block of Egan Avenue. And the rental I manage in that block is the only rental in the block. So if any of these choices of regulations were implemented, that would still be the only rental in that block. And we would be in complete compliance. The point to that being that these issues that come up are very often block and neighborhood specific. And at the meeting last night, at which Terry Schaefer joined us, Terry commented that in certain blocks of Mermaid and of Ocean View Boulevard, there is a lot of clustering of short-term rentals, but that she had not gotten any complaints from that neighborhood. And so the more I sort of talk to people about this and the more I look at the situation, the more clear I am that this is less about what the city can do to make blanket regulations that fix these things for the residents, and it's much more about what the groups of neighbors and the neighborhood and the property owners and the property managers can do as a group to solve those individual problems that go on in those neighborhoods. And somebody asked the question a few moments ago about what this group would do if it continued as a board or as a commission. And one of the things that I think that group could definitely do is to help those individual blocks or neighborhoods on a case-by-case basis to deal with solutions that will rectify their particular problems. For example, last night, one of the neighbors immediately adjacent to the property pointed out to me that the back door, the kitchen door of the property, which opens onto the driveway where people park, is very close to the wall of her house where her children's bedrooms are located and where the kids sleep. And she said when people go in and out the door and they shut their car doors and whatever, and they're talking loudly, then it disturbs the children. And I can completely understand that. But even though I thought about that all evening, I couldn't think of a single thing that the city could do to legislate something that would resolve that for her. The only thing I think we can do is that I can take it upon myself to educate my guests that are staying in that particular house about that particular situation that can alleviate that problem for that neighbor. And I think that we may be trying to solve problems that are not solvable at the city level. They may be more solvable at the neighborhood level or on the block level. And if they are, then that means a more personalized approach to dealing with these issues. We clearly know from experience that trying to legislate these away or trying to, even if you limit them, they're going to spring back up. They're going to operate underground. They're going to be there. And so the problem then becomes a bigger enforcement problem than if you have these properties registered and identified and licensed and managed, either by the owner or a manager. So I would just like us to think along those lines about what it's feasible and what it's reasonable for a city government to do, and for us not to task the city with things that it can't do, but to maybe create a situation that's more personalized for the individual neighborhoods that will help solve some of those individual problems.
I had a conversation with the city attorney this morning. I was concerned because I discovered Ewing versus the city of Carmel, and I wanted to know how that pertained to our task force. I now understand that. Aside from that, we did discuss limiting the number of occupants. I had read the ordinance for San Luis Obispo. It limits the number of occupants. They have at least at the writing I read, which I believe was January of this year, they do not allow short-term vacation rentals less than 30 days. But they do allow homestays. And one of their ordinances states there shall be a limit to 4 adults. To me, that was a red flag based on our discussions. You can't discriminate against children. It should be 4 occupants. That led to his concern that how can we legally limit occupants in any size house? We can limit them perhaps in a more creative way, but it will take careful writing to limit the number of occupants.
Which is one of the reasons that we came up with the first time with the 2 per bedroom plus 1, based on that exact concern.
Also, with respect to a city-created board to hear and monitor concerns about short-term vacation rentals, would that board have to be comprised of residents of Pacific Grove?
May I answer? Not necessarily. So, for example, the EDC, Economic Development Commission, it is the only commission currently that is allowed to be populated not all by PG residents, for the recognition that some of our businesses in the community are owned by people who live outside, and their perspective might be helpful. So that's up to the council. It's the council's choice.
Thank you.
My comment was, thank you both all, was to bring up Jan's comments, which she so eloquently covered from my perspective. I think that's eloquent. From last week, Robin, while you were gone, was the idea that her experience for so many years shows that there are these individual kind of subgroups within our city that really have different issues, different needs, different circumstances. And how do you impose or create a system by which everybody can be clear, happy, understanding? And I definitely, so I did a little bit of homework during the week that I'd like to share with you. I met with Roy LeKind, the commander-in-chief here, our police chief, and he was very gracious to spend some time with me. And I asked if there was a method to gather data for both long-term and short-term renter, because you have to treat them together, for complaints vis-a-vis anything. And he said, well, I think that the city is gathering this as well. And I said, yes, I do have that information, and it was very helpful. So that's the only bit of information I had. 3 things that I wanted to gather: the data from the city, from online, the data from the police, and data from the letters that people had written in, or anybody who showed up at meetings, and felt that it was really important to look at how many people, so we really can create some clarity around the numbers and what people's needs are. His statement was, when I explained to him the number of parking and noise complaints on the city's database, was that he felt that that was very low and that was good. There were 2 parking complaints and I believe 7. Please don't quote me on that because I don't have the sheet in front of me, since 2012. He does not have a way to monitor the difference. That's at a county level. Although what he did say was, I have not seen a rise in these kind of complaints. I have not seen a rise in parties, and it's very much the standard fare. And if they do have a problem, if anyone has a problem, call us. This is what we're here for. This is what we do. We want to show up at anybody's, and we were talking about either within the printed format that is on the wall, here's the police number, the direct line, here's the number of the manager or the homeowner, so that it's clear and right in front of them. That was really great. I also contacted Moamar because Commander Lakine's concern was, what's happening to our B&Bs? What's happening to the businesses here? I'm concerned about that. And I thought, well, that's an interesting question. Call the gentleman who's closest. The information I received was that there's been 2 boom years. Great years for the inns and for the B&Bs. So that was a positive thing because Moamar has been studying, hospitality for many years. So those were the 2 things that I discovered that I wanted to share. Was that before we moved forward with formalizing anything, I just wanted us to have a really clear picture of how this is actually impacting specific neighborhoods and individuals. And I don't like taking the sense of majority rules because there's a group of neighbors who are really concerned, and that's why we're here. We're here to hear it all and to address it. And I believe that Jan's suggestion of individual neighborhoods. Now, you had just mentioned, Robin, I think that there was the notion of creating a STVR board or city commission. And that would be, as I understand it, an independent body, not anything through the city. So it would be a hotline. Jen, you can better explain that there's a hotline on your website.
Well, there's several things, but when we're talking about creating a board, we are talking about something that would be an arm of the city.
Okay, excuse me, I misunderstood. Thank you for clarity.
My suggestion would be that in the same vein that the city has an architectural review board or any other board that deals with city issues, that this board would be designed to deal with rental issues. And my suggestion would be all types of rental issues because there are some long-term rental issues as well in town. I think that there's, a board could handle all of those. But as far as numbers people can call, my company has a 24/7 line that people can call. I give out my cell number, which anybody's welcome to call at any time. And the Monterey County Vacation Rental Alliance also has a hotline number that anybody can call at any time, whether they're a member or not. So
excellent. And a final note on this is we received a letter from a gentleman who was here at the first meeting, and forgive me, I'm not remembering his name. And it was a very thorough note. He lives next to apparently one of the party houses, and he and his wife came and he said, listen, I just don't want togas at 1 a.m. And I completely understand that. That is crazy. Or barking dogs. There were some things within his letter that I felt, the dog issue, I thought was an important aside. The idea that if people come, they're asked to leave their animals in their kenneled areas in the house while they're gone. That's reasonable, so they're not outside barking at people or neighbors or squirrels or whatever. He had many concerns regarding all the specifics to alleviate the party, but I believe once that is added to the ordinance and very clearly stated on all of the material in the city and anything people post in their homes, again, it's that squeaky wheel gets the grease, that will really alleviate a lot of what these painful houses. So that was my kind of final submission. And then maybe we can go through this list.
So I talked to the city of Palm Springs again, and the reason that I wanted to talk to Palm Springs is because they are a spring break mecca, right? So they're going to have a lot of party issues to deal with. That's where all the kids from the nearby colleges go. So, so I think last time I told you guys, so the first line of any kind of action is the hotline. They sent out postcards to every single homeowner saying, here's a hotline. Okay, or you can go to our website and the hotline number is there, but here's a hotline, put it on your fridge, call if you're having any issues with anything. The hotline people immediately call the emergency contact person, the emergency contact information. So that person has 45 minutes to respond to the issue at hand. The city of Palm Springs also has, they will call the police if there is any kind of noise disturbance that can be handled by the regular city ordinance. Then, they take care of that through the police. They also have a shadow process, which I thought was kind of interesting. So each of these hotline calls are logged in and sent to the city. The city then has their own database that they publish publicly. So everybody in the town gets to know where the problem areas are or whether there have been more than one complaint on a particular house or whatever. So all the neighbors are informed on what is going on with the hotline complaints. They also have an additional security force that they have hired, like a private security force, so that if the police cannot respond, because the police are actually dealing with, drug activity or an actual killing or, accidents or whatever, and they can't respond, then this private security force responds. So I said, wow, all of this sounds kind of expensive. How are you paying for all of this? And they said, our registration fee is $225 a year, but because they have 1,647 short-term rentals, that pays for all of these issues.
Services, yeah.
Right, and I'm certainly not suggesting that we go anything beyond, in that realm or anything, but their registration fees and their TOTS are sort of taking care of enforcing all of this. But she said it's a real enforcement hassle. She said it is a lot of work. It takes about 4 full-time people who have various odd jobs in this process to monitor all of this, to publish all of the enforcement, and publish all the hotline complaints and make sure that all the cases are closed and investigated. They also go out and investigate.
Yeah, 1,600 is a big number.
Yeah. So anyway, I think it might be worth a call, and I can send you, Tom and Mark, I can send you the name of the gal who is responsible for this. She's the director of their finance at the city level. And she said it is an iterative process. It is not, they didn't just find one solution and stick with it, because they keep having to massage it and evolve it and respond to what the citizens are asking for. So to your point, Tom, I think we probably will be here in another 6 months. I think we'll be here again in another 6 months after that, and another 6 months after that. I don't think this is a one-size-fits-all solution. I think this is going to be an iterative process.
Unless the city council make up changes and the council votes to phase them out and there aren't any, or unless the community creates a referendum that says, we can't handle this, we're going to put it to a vote.
So the community can definitely do that. Now, I talked to some of these, like the VRBOs and the Airbnbs. So here's what happens when you phase them out. When you say I'm no longer going to deal with them, two things happen. One is obviously the city loses the TOT, so they lose all of that license money. The second thing that happens when you lose that money and the registration fees is you have no enforcement mechanism. And so not only does the city lose the license fee, but they lose any means of enforcing the undergrounds. They lose any means of enforcing what happens when people complain about the people who've gone underground. So, for example, Airbnb, their largest domestic market is New York. And New York banned short-term rentals a year ago. But their largest domestic market is in New York. So it didn't go away. It only became bigger and bigger. The city is losing out in, $16 million in license fees and the TOT. And in addition to that, the city has no department or means of enforcing the bad actors.
I don't see a difference in enforcing a law currently, or with our in the future. We do not have a force that responds to neighbor complaints, whether they're with short-term vacation rentals or anything else. So if the city were to disallow them, we would continue as a community and the we would be the entire community, dealing with issues in our neighborhood in the way we always have. We'd keep our mouths shut, number one, and stuff it, or we'd call the police, and if that didn't work, we would have no other recourse. So I don't see that that's a big issue. What I do see as an issue is if the population decided that the peaceful enjoyment of their own home was so disturbed that there were a sufficient number who created a referendum. What I see is that Airbnb and VRBO and HomeAway would finance the opposing side, and it would be a futile effort. So I'd like to keep it from happening in the community. I'd like to find a workable solution where we continue to have vacation rentals in a way that's acceptable to the neighborhoods, and that individual neighborhoods are not impacted so negatively that that their unhappiness continues to be a problem to the community.
I think we agree.
And so I do believe that 7 vacation rentals on one block with parking on only one side is a problem. And we need to create a situation where that doesn't happen. And so I hope we can work to that end.
Can I ask you a question?
Yes.
And I'm not trying to put words in your mouth, but if I hear you correctly, you're saying there's certain things the city can do and maybe not do.
Mm-hmm.
And even if we can do it, we're not going to do it perfectly because we're human.
Right.
Do you also agree with Jan that there are certain things that are best done not by the city, but that can be done by either the neighborhood or some other mechanism?
Well, I do agree with that. It's my observation, and I put it in, because I missed the last meeting, I put it in my notes, that in thinking about it, my goodness, I've thought as much about this as everybody else, that the vacation rental next door to me moves along smoothly because, in part, because we monitor it. We are participants in their investment. So if the trash is dumped all over the street when it's picked up, the owners, well, I don't know the owners, I've never seen them. They could be sitting in this room and I wouldn't know them. The owners don't know that I've picked up the trash. The owners don't know that the phone book that was put on their sidewalk is sitting out there gathering rain. I'm the one who takes care of it. The owners don't know that their tenant, whose car can't start, comes to my house to find out what to do. These are things I've done because I'm a neighborly person, and I'm only one person in this big community. But it occurred to me that I could look at it a different way. They couldn't succeed if I didn't participate, and that's something I think that we need to look at. And the idea of involving the neighbors is, I think, a good one. And I think that's something that we need to work toward. What's going to make this work and have it be representative of what each one of us feels in the room? I happen to know that the reason the December 16th date to report to the City Council, as told me, the Planning Commission, by the councilman who recommended that, was to please so many who were angered by the city to not impose the moratorium. So they wanted a speedy response. The fact that it put the Planning Commission in a bind wasn't a consideration. I know that.
Well, it wasn't some people's mind, but when the majority voted, it wasn't. You're right.
Right. So that's it.
Can I follow up on one of those points? And it's a very good one. Neighborhoods can indeed work together to solve things. They always have. The problem is we don't have neighbors anymore. We've got motels on the street, and we've spent a lot of time today talking about noisy parties. Well, that's fine. I don't particularly care. If it's really out of hand, I knock on the door. If that doesn't do it, I'll call the police. That's not an issue for me. It is an issue for some people. I understand that. It's all the goddamn strangers on the street at all the time and walking up and down and standing and staring in the windows and coming up on the porches and taking pictures of each other. That's what's bothering us the most, and the parking congestion that goes with that. If the folks knew how to park, knew how to squeeze up together, it might be alleviated. That's what residents used to do when we had them. We don't have them anymore. We've got motels. We've got, we had maybe a prowler a few weeks ago. They got up one morning and a gate that can't open by itself or with animals or the wind was standing open the first time since I've lived there. And I asked my fiance if she heard anything, and she didn't. And I said, well, either we had a prowler, which is possible, or who knows, it could have been a short-term renter just roaming around and looking. That happens. We have seen that, not in the middle of the night. But I didn't know. Do we have a prowler? Should we call the police, or do we just have a nosy renter? I don't know. This weekend, Thursday, I got my third key scratch of the year. Thank you. And I don't mean that personally. I'm thanking you. I'm sorry. Bad use words. One of the first trucks that pulled up parked in about 3 spaces. And so I just happened to be out feeding a cat, and so I said, would you mind pulling up a little or back a little just so somebody else can park here? Oh, no problem. And he sat there and waited until the second truck showed up and pulled up for them. And I got a nice key scratch out of it. Okay. Is it them? Who knows? If I knew who it was, I could call the police. But that's what makes life bad on that street. It's not noisy parties. It's not the what else have we been talking about that I could care less of? Not the trash cans. I don't care. The streets are narrow, and when the trash can's there, you can shove them up on the sidewalks or just walk around them. Your choice. And anyway, go back to my first complaint of a year ago. What we're doing is changing the character of our residential neighborhoods. We have had good neighbors evicted to make room for short-term rentals. That's disrupted the neighborhood. Indeed, we have some part-time houses where the folks come occasionally, not there all the time, and for 2 of them, I look after them much as you look after the short-term rental. If there's mail delivery or whatnot, I pick it up for them so it won't accumulate and be a tip-off. Nobody's living there. That kind of thing happens. and I'm not making my point as well as I want to make it, but the problem is we can't solve these things together because we don't have neighbors to talk to anymore. The neighbors on either side of me bring their complaints to me, and I keep saying, tell City Hall, call the police. There's nothing I can do about this. Well, this parking, just what are we going to do about this? And it stops right there because they're renters and they're young and they're not used to dealing with governments and things. So because of my longevity there, I'm the de facto government in their minds. Was I elected? Anyway, that's my point, is if we had neighbors, we could talk through things and deal with things. We don't. We've got people there by the night.
I have a add-on to what, there are three things here that happen. I had the pleasure of working with the school to try and improve the lunch program, and wow, was that a journey. Don't ever go up against Tyson Chicken, let me tell you. Anything can happen but that. One of the suggestions was that we contact, because this is what we had, very similar, back and forth, and what do you think, and this is what we believe, but you know, the rest of the team. And we got a hold of the district for permission, and we got a hold of the PTA to use their database, which is big. And we sent out a questionnaire. And the questionnaire was we really had to go over the questions. They had to be non-biased. They were clear. And they asked, is this important to you? Do you understand the program we have in place now? Are you interested in changing it? Do you know that there are options, et cetera, et cetera? We thought we'd get a good middle ground. It was a landslide of how many parents were concerned with the issue. They wanted it changed. They didn't know if they could. They didn't know. So it was in part education, in part organizing. And I initially, from the very first meeting that I attended, I thought the same thing. What an opportunity to create a survey that's very non-partial, that's unbiased, to just, because that's what I kept getting, was a sense that there are different clusters of neighbors, that there are people that are feeling really frightened about what's going on. They have people coming and going. They don't know that they're vetted. They don't understand. And how to create some kind of questionnaire so we could see really where people stand on this whole dilemma, or issue, or whatever you want to call it. I'm not so sure. When I talk to the people in my age group with children and with doing, that live here, and there's kind of a 50-50. There's this really 50-50, but they also want to see their programs maintained. They want to know that the library is available to the kids. They want to know that the parks are here. Those are the important things for the people kind of in my group, from the kind of 25 to 50, so to speak. And I was able to speak to a lot of people, and very impartially, just to ask what. So in this whole discussion, would it be a possibility to see how much, if the city of down south, Palm Springs sent out postcards, because I don't know how you could reach the older folks that don't use the computer. You'd have to really have a way to contact everybody, to just say either go to the website so you can read the specifics, the frequently asked questions, to understand, like the police chief, he said, well, isn't this affecting our local businesses of rental units? And it could, as long as we agree on it. Now, this is a bit off the task force, what we're deciding
it's
here.
Not, but we have a timing
just
problem.
Yeah.
And that when the council chose not to extend the moratorium, they explicitly knew the chances for us to develop the data, either through surveys or other mechanisms or a combination, to be able to ensure that any decision they made was fact-based, was significantly diminished. And then, as Robin says, when the council subsequently to that decided that for a variety of reasons they needed to move quickly, they again reinforced the problem we have, that we can't do the kinds of information gathering that would really assist this group in coming up with recommendations that were bulletproof.
I agree.
So that's not to say you couldn't recommend to the council that the December 16th deadline is ridiculous, that the moratorium should be reinstituted, that there should be a survey, but there's no way between now and the 16th that I know of to do a a scientifically valid and reliable survey.
I agree.
To get the kind of information that you'd all like. Not to say we couldn't, have Marjan put something out in the Cedar Street Times or put out something on the city's websites, but we're going to reach only a subset of the community. And that's a problem because we won't know that the responses are
Not reliable.
representative.
Correct. And Tom, if I may add, I did not foresee that as a suggestion by the 16th. There's no way. That would be kind of a future
Sure.
event. I keep in my mind's eye thinking that we have a year, right, till June, and that the suggestions that we place here by the 16th are going to support a better, a more efficient program, and at such time that we're looking at a referendum, and now we're really splitting our city, and at least at that point we could look at
Sure.
potentially. So it's kind of in stages.
And you certainly could say to the council, as a task force, we did not feel we had enough information and the views of the community sufficiently well understood that we could make substantive recommendations to you. So our recommendation is to do a survey. If you do that, I'm just telling you my opinion, the city council will feel it needs to do something substantive on its own without the value of your advice. So I'm not saying don't do that, but there is a risk in doing that. But it seems to me today we keep bumping up against this, among other issues, one very important issue, and that's the clustering. And that's where you asked Mark and Haroon to go away last week and bring you back information. So maybe it would be worthwhile, given the 35 minutes we have left, to really focus on that issue. Do you want to address clustering? And there's some of you who do. And do you not want to address clustering? And I'm not trying to put words in anybody's mouth, but I think there's some of you who feel clustering isn't the issue that the city should be addressing. Maybe the neighborhood, but not the city. So I don't know that you can make a whole lot more progress on all these other substantive issues until you address the clustering issue one way or the other. So that would be my recommendation to you as a group. And let me just give one piece of why I think that's important. One of the things the mayor said early on that really resonated with me, and that is, under the city's current program, the potential benefits of short-term rentals accrue primarily to the owner of the property. They also accrue to the city as a whole through TOT and sales tax and whatever else. And the primary costs of the short-term rental program, given the lack of good enforcement by the city, good regulations, whatever, are accruing or being imposed primarily on the neighbors. And that's the definition of moral hazard, when some people benefit and others bear the cost. And one of the things the mayor wants, and he's just one of 7, but that's one thing the mayor wants, is to come up with a program that if we're going to have short-term rentals, there's a better balance there, so that the costs and benefits to the owners of the property are balanced in their minds, or whatever, and the costs and benefits to the neighbors are balanced, so that we don't have armed camps, we're still going to have ongoing issues, we're still going to have to, but to the extent we can balance those, maybe we can find a path that helps us go forward. So, and that's clearly at the heart of the clustering issue, and then impacts that some neighborhoods are feeling and others aren't feeling at all. So,
Can I add another part to your
course.
equation? So your equation is the cost of enforcing the program is falling primarily on the shoulders of neighbors and the city, but the benefits are accruing to the owners. There's another part of this equation also, which is that the short-term rentals are primarily newer bought homes, and so the tax that they are paying, the property tax, is much higher than those who have been here for a really long time. So that part, they're actually contributing a lot more to the economy here and to the city budget than the long-term owners are. So that cost, I believe, is mitigating some of the costs that you're talking about that is
sure.
being borne
And
by
if you want to do
the
that
neighbors.
analysis, it has to be done in depth, because you're probably making a very valid point. I don't know, I haven't done the analysis, but it's also true the city only gets 17% of the property tax. So, we can play with numbers, and it'd be a difficult analysis, but it's worthwhile doing it if we had the time.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Right, and before I'd let that point go, I'd want to know what those numbers are, because I don't think any of the licensed places on our block have been changed hands in the last 6-7 years. And some of those were purchased when the market was low last time.
Actually,
That's real fact.
actually, that's not the case. They've changed hands 3 times. 3 have changed hands in the last 6-7 years.
Who's that?
We can talk
Yeah.
about it later.
Yeah,
But
let's-
3 definitely have changed
So
hands.
can we focus in on the clustering? Do you
Yes,
want
so,
clustering or not?
so let's talk about clustering.
Could we discuss this document that Mark shared, which
Please.
addresses that and how we feel about
Sure.
each point?
If we can pass over the points that don't relate to clustering, I prefer, because otherwise, by December 16th, we'll never get to the, but go for it, Robin.
Well, then perhaps I'm wrong in what I suggested. I thought that's what we wanted to talk about. It seems like a start to get.
Well, for example, the point number 5 really doesn't relate to clustering or not. So I was suggesting if we can emphasize the points here that relate to clustering or not, maybe we can make some progress.
All right?
But you're right, some of these really do relate to, do we prohibit clustering or not?
And just as a foundation, can I point out that if I'm counting correctly, that Mark has highlighted, I think there are 18 of the 260 with clusters.
Does that mean more than one?
More than,
And if I'm counting his numbers correctly, it's 44 or 45 excess.
I'll take your word for that.
Okay, well, give or take a few.
Yeah, okay.
Okay.
I actually did count them, and you're right, it's about 44 to 45.
John, you can see the square where you are, which is the highest number, with a 9.
No, that's not his.
No, that's not yours. What's the
No.
9?
I'm with
That's
7.
9 at 7th
Probably
Street.
585 Ocean View, is
Oh,
it?
Yeah.
Oh, that's 9, there's just 2, 3 that are really high. Okay.
Because I have some around the corner from
Oh, I
that
know
building
what you're
also.
talking about. Yeah, yeah.
So that's,
No, Mark,
That's
our block is 5 short-term rentals.
5?
Yeah, and licensed short-term rentals, yes.
And I'm guessing the 6 would be 7th Street, but I don't know for sure.
Yeah. Yeah, probably.
How do we, as we go through this, a quick question, how do we feel as a task force about the idea of addressing clustered neighborhoods as per neighborhood under something that Jan had suggested, rather than an overall policy that would affect other neighborhoods that really, within a new structure that stated you were to get a hold of your neighbors and send a letter out and introduce yourselves?
well, I think as
Because that addresses
as
the
an-
clustering.
as evidence of that, for example, the cluster that has the number 9, I think I manage probably 6 or 7 of those, and that is not an area where we have had any problems, nor has anyone from that area been here in any of these meetings or been to the city, been to any of the city council meetings to speak at public comment when the opportunity arose. So while I'm not here to say that there are not any issues there, I'm just saying that in what apparently, looking at the map, is the most impacted area, I'm not aware of any issues there. So there may not be a relationship between the cluster and the problems. That's,
From that, in that one area, that this is really important to hear, I believe. And it leads me to the direction to look at the clusters as a neighborhood managed process rather than an overall town ordinance, but to be very clear and specific within the language so that Tom, you feel that your space is honored and that shortly may I address, Jan, you mentioned last year, you weren't here, that the maximum or rental days are probably like 60%. So in our minds, we're thinking, oh, these places are renting 365 days a year, which isn't quite the case. It's more that the maximum rentals. So
yeah, when I looked
60% occupancy.
when I looked at this suggestion that the property be limited to a total of 150 rental days, I mean, obviously, the owners that I represent are not going to be thrilled if I tell them I can only rent it 150 days. But then I looked at my statistics and I said, well, interestingly enough, most of you rent about 150 days or less anyway.
That's a
And
3-day weekend.
so-
All year round.
Pardon?
That's a 3-day weekend year round.
Well, exactly, and certainly, as Tom has attested, they're not rented every weekend, it's seasonal, and, you know, I would easily envision that if I managed properties under this plan, that I could, without a problem, I could limit the number of short-term rental days to 150, and if the owner wanted more income, then I could put a 30-day or longer than 30-day tenant in the property for the balance of the time or for some part of the time, so that the owner had somebody physically there, which a lot of the owners like for security, and continued their income stream. So,
I mean, that 30-day would be over outside the 150-day limit, is that what you're saying?
yeah, Mark and I did have a conversation about that. I clarified with him that this total of 150 rental days meant 150
Short-term.
short-term rental days, and that,
Okay.
you know, the option for the owners would be to rent the rest of the time for more than 30 days.
Okay, so let's get back, if we could, to the
Sure.
point Annalisa and Jen, you both made, that maybe there are parts of this problem that are best managed at a neighborhood level. How do we do that in a neighborhood that has so few people there on an ongoing basis? How can the city, as many faults as we have the hammer. We can hammer people. How does the neighborhood manage the problem when there's so few people in the neighborhood on an ongoing basis? The issue that Tom's raised. How would you do it?
I still go back to the fact that you need this board. You need the board.
But then the board's
and-
going to have a hammer, is what you're saying.
Right, so, but the hammer has to look different for every neighborhood. In Tom's neighborhood, I mean, I manage only one property on that block, so I don't, you didn't know that, did you? Oh, well, see, then my house hasn't been a problem. Aw.
I mean, 10,
205.
their license expired. Oh, no.
No.
205. Okay, no.
Yeah, John, never let
205.
license expire.
205, though, is where that,
Thank you.
the older lady was evicted in order for them to buy the house and turn it over and turn it into a short-term rental. Do you
About-
remember her? She was about 87
I
years
do.
Okay,
old.
wait a minute.
I do, and that was about
Clock is
12 years
ticking.
ago.
Yeah,
And the
clock,
woman
yeah.
who had it remodeled several times was intending to live there at one point when she moved in.
But
and
she
didn't
didn't.
really like it, and so it's been empty for over many.
But anyway,
Yeah,
go on,
we
Jan. So
want
it's-
to be
yeah.
respectful
All right.
of our time.
So the board then is tasked with going to the neighborhood, even if there are a few people, going to the neighborhood and talking with those neighbors about what will solve the problem. So I mean, the first thing I would ask, if I was the board and you were the neighbor, I would ask, does permit parking on your street make sense? Does that help solve the problem any? Does painting stripes on the street so that you don't have the truck parking taking up multiple spaces, does that help any? And so we explore the ways of solving the problem.
Yeah.
But, you know, again, I think whatever happens on the 200 block of 18th Street may or may not be applicable to any other street in town, any other block in town. So I think that in order to get to the meat of what's going to make this palatable for the neighbors and how to balance that scale is some personal involvement. And to say, you know, to think that we can, you know, make blanket regulations that solve
No, I understand
everybody's
that,
problems
but it
are.
seems to me that's a slightly different approach, and that's not the neighborhood solving the problem. It's the city addressing the problem at a neighborhood
At
level.
a neighborhood level.
That's, to me,
At a-
I'm not
yes.
saying that's not the right solution, but that's a different solution than I think Tom has been asking for, which is the ability for the neighborhood itself to solve the problem by
But the
making-
neighborhood's going to need the city's help to solve the problem, I think. Do you?
We have so few neighbors that it's hard to tell. And it's like, I was just looking at that area that's got the 9. Does anybody live there full-time?
There are some people
would
who
you meet
live there
with?
full-time. Yeah,
Okay.
and in fact, I know most of them because I'm in that neighborhood so frequently.
Would the committee agree that the short-term vacation rental way of living is on the rise or on the decline?
Rise.
I think it is temporarily on the rise, but as I said to somebody else not long ago, these things ebb and flow. And as you and I both know from being in the real estate business, real estate trends come and go. And this one is on the way up the, uphill side of the roller coaster right now, but, it could go down the other side at any moment.
The end point is, if it's going up, what do we have in place to protect other neighbors from clustering? And I think we need to think beyond the 200 block of 18th to maybe
If
the
clustering
200
is the problem, I'm not convinced clustering is the problem, and I point to that number 9 right there.
Yeah. See, I'm not convinced that clustering is the problem because, as I said, I'm on the same block and I'm not experiencing what Tom is experiencing.
there.
I understand that you don't think I live there, but I was there in April, I was there in August, and now I'm here now.
A few days
And
at
Tom, just because I am only there for 10 days at a time does not mean that I do not have a valid viewpoint. I have a valid viewpoint and I'd like to be able to state it. So I feel that, as Jan is saying, I don't think clustering is the problem. I think that there are certain houses that are a problem.
Well, I think that's true, and as evidence, I would point back to, again, this group of neighbors that I met with last night. We only have one house on the block. It's not a cluster, but it's a problem. So we have to address the real problems.
The real
and I don't
problem.
think clustering is the problem.
Right. Now, the other thing I wanted to suggest is that maybe there's a combination of universal regulation that we could impose on a sort of general level,
Yes.
like a cap, and then the second tier, which is a neighborhood solution, which could be a number of neighbors who can get together on a block that's having a problem and have a mediator like this council or this board or whatever it is that we're thinking about.
That's what I was going to suggest as well. And when I answered Robin with if they're on the rise, my specific thought in my mind was really for the type of thing that I would like to do, which means I live in my home and maybe a weekend or a week out of the year I'm renting it. So it's not like a full till I don't live there. It's a little bit different. So in my mind's eye, I was speaking in terms of a different type of short-term rental. So I wanted to clarify that. Because I think you do. You get to a cap and people come to the point where they don't want people sleeping in their beds. It's not for everybody's cup of tea. It really isn't. So.
As houses become available in each neighborhood, in a community where short-term vacation rentals are permitted, and given what I have found, barely even looking for it, the Anaheim thing that was sent to us, what I discovered when I looked at my brother's newspaper about all these young people trying to work in the ski towns, don't have any place to live. As we become aware of that, I think it's normal to think that the fabric of our neighborhoods is being undermined. And I think we have an opportunity here to do something to put the minds of the citizens of our community at rest if we'll tackle some uncomfortable issues. I do believe clustering is a problem. One of the things I found, this is about a neighborhood in Loma Linda, I think. The single-family neighborhoods are supposed to be the backbone of your community, where you've got the stable residents that are vested, she said. They join the town council. They coach the Little League teams. They send their kids to the neighborhood schools. Every time you take a single-family residence out of that pool and make it a tourist rental, you're tearing a hole in the fabric of the community. If you get enough of those holes, your community disintegrates. Tom's community has disintegrated. I don't want mine to.
No, Robin, I absolutely refuse to accept that as a fact.
So we have a difference of opinion.
We have a difference of opinion, so you can say Tom feels that his community has disintegrated.
Tom feels that his community has
Neighborhood.
disintegrated.
Neighborhood.
Pardon?
Neighborhood.
His neighborhood
Yes.
has disintegrated. He really can't go next door and borrow a cup of sugar.
He can. He can go
I think
into
it's
any one of
more
our
like-
homes and borrow a cup of
I
sugar.
think it's more likely.
In fact, I'm going to buy you a 5-gallon bag of sugar, so this will never be an issue again.
Okay,
Sorry.
let's let Robin.
Robin,
Yes,
sorry
Robin.
about that.
I know that not all may agree with this, but we have people in our community who do. And I believe it's my job to speak out for them. And so I happen to believe that clustering is a problem.
So there's one thing that what you're saying presumes, and that is that if we get rid of the short-term rentals, that those owners are necessarily going to rent their spaces out to a long-term person. I don't really feel that that's going to happen, and I think Jan's going to verify this. What's going to happen is those are going to once again become empty vacation homes that, once again, I'm not sure help the fabric of this community. What happens is that then long-term renters like Tom are never bothered again by, all of these empty homes, but they're not necessarily going to become long-term rentals.
Well, I can clearly attest to that. In 1993, when the city of Pacific Grove adopted their ordinance prohibiting rentals for less than 30 days, I managed probably what at that time was half of the vacation rentals, and that was about 30. There were about 60 in town, the other 30 mostly being owner-operated. And of the 30 rentals that I managed at that time, only one placed a long-term rental in her house. None of the others did.
What happened to the other 29?
The other 29 primarily became second homes for the owners, as you described, or we put 30-day tenants in them. So we still had transient tenancies, just for longer times. And the owners still felt it was very important to come and use their properties. That's the reason they wanted to short-term rent their houses in the first place. They felt it was still important for them to be able to come and use them, so they either left them empty or they put 30-day tenants.
Would the 150-day limit or some limit discourage the outside firms and investment companies that are buying these to rent for 365 days a year, and make more of them be, or not? Would
Let
it?
me just dispel that myth. I mean, I guess there are some places in the country that maybe it works for an investor to go buy a house and short-term rent it, and it makes sense. But for the most part, I mean, here, it just does not pencil out. You can't make it make sense.
Yeah.
And I think I sent one or both of you an article today. Maybe you haven't seen it yet in your email, but it's the first time I've seen somebody write about this. But the Huffington Post today, I believe, had an article that was written by somebody the title of the article was Vacation Home or ROI. And the gist of the article was that it sounds all romantic, that you like to ski, so you're going to go buy a ski house in Aspen or whatever, and you're going to make a bunch of money when you're not using it. And now you don't have to spend $10,000 a week renting a ski chalet for yourself, because now you own one. So you've saved the cost of that, and now you can pay the cost of the chalet by renting it out. And it sounds very romantic. It sounds very enticing. It sounds wonderful. The bottom line is it doesn't make financial sense. When you start looking at the cost of it, it just doesn't make financial sense. And I have, for 30 years, I have had this same conversation with investors who walk in my office and say, what can I buy and that will give me a decent ROI and allow me to use it as a vacation rental? I said, you cannot do it. You can't do it. You might as well, put that money in a Schwab account and earn 5% or whatever you can get on it today, because your ROI on the investment property is going to be less than that.
So is the conclusion what you're saying then, that the people who tend to buy homes in PG that either initially or at some point become short-term rentals are either people who want to be here for times during the year,
Yes.
or people are looking for a place to retire to, or otherwise live in the future, and this is a way of
Yeah.
getting there.
Typically both of
Yes.
those. Typically
Yes.
both of those things.
Yes.
I think that
So there are people who care about the PG
I'm trying-
as a community.
I'm
Yes.
trying to think about, in
Yes.
my entire inventory of 110 houses, I don't think there is anyone I represent who bought that house for an investment. I'm sure there's not.
Right.
Nobody thinks that this is a money-making operation.
It's not.
It's
It's
not.
not. And-
It's just too expensive to
Yes.
run the house.
Yes. In our case, I can tell you that over 12 years, when we did not have the short-term rental, actually over 14 years that we did not have short-term rental, we made up the difference in our mortgage, $150,000. That's what we had to make up that we don't get from renting it out long-term or just not renting it out at all.
Well, and I can cite another example. I own a second home in Kauai. And it's a big house and it's expensive. And one day, my husband and I were talking about what it costs to own the house and what we would spend vacationing there if we didn't own the house. And so it occurred to me to take the entire cost of the house and calculate the number of days we had used the house since we bought it, which was about, 12 years ago now, and figure out how much it cost us
Per day.
to
per
go.
day
Yeah.
to own that house and
Did you have
vacation
a Did you
there.
have a little heart attack?
Almost.
Oh, yeah.
It cost
Yeah.
over $4,000 a day
Yeah.
for
Yeah.
us to
This is
enjoy that
important to
house.
shout out.
Right.
And if I may,
you
Jen,
do just say, what the heck am I doing here?
I wanted to bring up that last week's meeting, we spoke about Carmel, that right now Carmel is at 38% non-occupancy.
It's higher than
Higher than that, it's over 50.
Oh, yeah.
I thought it was
it's-
38%.
No, it's more like 62%.
60 to 70%.
Yeah.
And it just the idea of our town, so if we had a cap,
Do you know what it is in
Said-
Pacific Grove?
it's lower.
50% of the houses in PG are non-owner occupied.
Well, but that's different.
Rental, meaning, I'm sorry, vacant and not lived in or any of that. That's
but
what I
are
was-
non-owner occupied. So when you have these conversations about, owners being emotionally invested in the neighborhoods and, owners participating in neighborhoods and so
Right.
forth, again, I keep going back to this meeting I had last night with these wonderful neighbors. I mean, I think everybody in the room was an owner occupant. I don't think anybody there was a tenant occupant. But they're all very emotionally invested in the neighborhood. And it's very rare that you can find a block of people
Who all live
like
and
that,
own
who
and-
all
yeah.
live there and own there. I mean, it's getting fewer and fewer. And, to Robin's point about and somebody else has made the point about, changing character of the neighborhood, we don't have control of that. We do not have control over who buys a house. And we have some control over what they do with it. But we don't have control over who buys it. One of the people at the meeting last night expressed concern that the house on the other side of her had just sold and one across the street had just sold, and she was really nervous about, what the buyers were going to do with the houses. And, we don't have any control over that. So,
That was
you can't
yeah.
legislate whether somebody's going to move in and be a Boy Scout leader or, be on the PTA.
I
or
disagree.
whatever.
We can't legislate it, but we can do things that increase the likelihood. If, PG is precious for the type of community it is, the more we can do to maintain that, the more likely people who buy in will share those values. So we can't legislate it.
Yes.
But we sure can try
Okay.
to. Okay.
Yeah.
No, I agree with what you're saying. And I went on Zillow 2 nights ago. The lowest price home on Zillow allowed a family of 2 and then 2 children for 4, a mortgage of around $4,000. That's with a 20% down. And I'm
Are you
looking at
talking about
these
in
numbers.
Pacific Grove?
Yeah, I'm looking at these numbers and they are off the charts high. So it is changing, and how to change with it. And I think that there is, in the beginning, I was really anti the cap. You have to have growth. I'm a business owner. You can't. But I believe that can be a solution for this next year, to really come up with and tell the neighborhoods, look, we've decided and we've agreed that this is a number we all can live with. Clustering, that's.
Maybe we need different things for different neighborhoods.
That's what
Some cities have done that.
Isn't
Yeah,
that what this is about?
Right. I would like to clarify something
Sure.
about short-term vacation rentals. To me, are different than non-owner occupied homes. Carmel has been a part of my background my entire life, and a part of my professional life. This is my neighborhood. This is Lighthouse Avenue. This is Washington Park. This is multi-residential properties. This is Bentley Street. The circles are non-owner occupied homes. The family in this home, we occasionally put their trash cans away. Every year they bring us buckets of nuts and dried fruit and to thank us for watching out.
I love it.
These two are friendly. This one is the under the radar one. It's not a licensed short-term vacation rental. It may only be used by family, but the faces of the family change frequently. It's well maintained. This one is the short-term vacation rental. It's well maintained. I don't have any problem with the balance. Short-term vacation rental or non-owner occupied. I don't think one is better than the other. It doesn't scare me. If they all became non-owner occupied, I'd be okay with it. It's not the best thing, but we've lived there 43 years, and those 43 years haven't all been a bed of roses. They are now, but it hasn't always been that way.
Tom, can I suggest that instead of focusing on density for right now, can we focus on the things that we actually can agree on the task force? Like, for example, can we agree on a cap? Can we agree on a 2-night minimum? Can we agree on no more than X number of people per short-term rental? Can we agree on some of these?
We certainly can focus on that, and that's
So
what
look through the
we
list
tried to
here.
do last week. You did agree, without Robin here, you did agree a lot of
Sorry.
things.
Yeah, no, we're here.
No, I didn't mean it that way, but
We
we want to
waited
make sure
for
you
you,
understand. Okay. And I was trying to start focusing on the things you hadn't agreed to, because you do have so much you agree on.
Right.
But-
So
The
maybe.
more things that we
This
can...
list, I
So
think,
are
is
we-
a good thing to do.
So I just want to get a read. So is everybody agreed on, is 260 a comfortable number for everybody as a cap? Like,
It is for me.
as something that we can
Now that
recommend
I
as a task
understand
force?
it, yeah.
Is that okay? All right. Okay, cool.
I would like to see 300 on here, but
Okay.
how about this? In the nature of agreeing and moving forward, perhaps we can look at this to then see how this works until June, to really ascertain
Okay.
that, and it's going to change, things will change. So I'm happy if this makes my fellow folks happy. Let's go for that, because I would like to.
And let's remember, that's
Be
the definition
flexible.
of consensus.
Yes, I
It
would
may
like
not
to
be
be
what each of
flexible.
you as individuals think
Yeah.
is best, what you think is best for the...
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's what I'm going to mention.
Okay.
That could
Okay.
be a number that in the future, if the
Okay.
program works, we can look
Okay.
at it.
So we actually have one thing that 2 weeks in a row we've agreed on.
Yeah. So if we can drop down to no direction given on one per property metric. Now, one of the things that I think we have talked about is that condos, like the Holman building, don't they have their own HOA where they decide on things like whether any of these can become short-term rentals,
they'll
how
have
many of them?
they'll have CC&Rs.
So I don't think we have to decide that for multi-property units, right?
Oh, I don't agree with that.
Or
No.
So-
apartment buildings?
I think we need to. I think we need to.
Public
give
needs to
direction on
refrain
that.
from commenting.
I definitely want to comment on this one, if I may. And I've been waiting to comment on this. I've expressed that we have property in downtown Santa Cruz. I know Santa Cruz is not PG. I get it. But the benefits to having that mixed use Our neighbors are all businesses. They love us. Hula's is one of them. Our guests go down. They park in public parking. They can make as much noise as they want because they use the restaurants. They pull all the kids in. It's just such a win-win. And the downtown has been kind of, fluctuating for the last 10 years. But potentially that mixed use zoning is in the downtown corridor is a perfect solution.
Yeah.
It's worked really well.
Just so you know, we have mixed use.
Okay, yeah, so I wanted to bring that up because Holman is mixed use and there are some other properties. And that way you're out of the residential neighborhoods. And
I think people who live in mixed-use areas have different expectations about what the quiet enjoyment of their property means. And I think people who live in apartment buildings and people who live in close proximity to neighbors and businesses and that sort of thing have different ideas and different expectations about how they're going to enjoy their property. And I think it's does not seem to me to be a problem to have various uses in
mixed use.
the multi-res and the mixed-use zones.
But that's different than you're making a distinction between the R1 zone
Yes.
and the mixed use zone. Yeah.
Yes.
That was kind of.
Because we have lots of,
That's the direction
we have a
I
fair number of
started
neighborhoods
specifying.
that have mostly single-family homes, and then there's a 4-unit apartment right there. And I think one of the reasons this was brought up originally is in the R1 zones that happen to have that,
Yeah.
should the city limit to one on that property so that one property doesn't have such a,
In the R1 zones,
In the
I
R1
would
zone.
say yes.
I'm going to propose yes. In the R1 zones, we only have one property per, we only have
One license per property.
Robin,
one
what do you
What
feel
if
about
the
that?
R1 zone divides a neighborhood? It's the same street, and then it's all of a sudden R3. That use
You
of
have to draw a
that.
line somewhere.
Well, I just think
Yeah.
that apartment building, it should be one per property. I don't see it. I don't see any benefit to a community that is due to zoning changes in the 1960s, when I was alive, had a mixture of apartment buildings and single-family residences. Those apartment buildings negatively impacted everyone around them. This would be another insult to the single-family dwellings in those neighborhoods, whether the ownership has changed or not.
Okay. I'm actually in agreement with you, but let me bring up the Steinbeck. let me just bring up the Steinbeck house because I think that is a big draw here for PG. The Steinbeck house, I believe, has 3 properties on one. 3
which of the many Steinbeck
rentals.
homes are you referring to? Yeah.
Oh, yeah, are there more? Because I just thought there was that one with the 3 little cottages.
No.
No, that's in Monterey.
No, it's right here in PG.
They
There's
lived there in the
one.
40s. That's not where he wrote movie scripts when he was in that place, I think.
The
There's,
one on
there's many.
11.
So
Okay.
which street
What
are you
street are
referring
you
to?
talking
I have no
It's
idea
on
what
Early.
what
I
street
can't
it's
remember
on.
what
Oh,
street,
on
but they're
Early. Okay.
family who purchased the
Yeah.
property. They fixed it up. They went through the city. They did everything.
Yeah.
And they've been renting it. And then they've been in
Yeah.
several of the meetings saying this
Yeah,
really
well, it's 2
works. Our
o'clock. We're
neighbors
supposed
are
to be breaking,
happy.
Yeah.
With what we're doing. We're in agreement in our community, and if you change for us, then it's really going to affect.
So Robin, are you
us.
suggesting that there seems to be agreement that at least in the R1 zone, there, and I'm not trying to put words
It's
in,
one
but
per-
one per property.
Yeah.
Are you suggesting that would be citywide, or are you suggesting that would be on blocks that there are both R1s and non-R1s in the same block? I'm not quite sure what you're suggesting. Over and above the R1.
Well, definitely R1.
Right.
However, on all those streets for which Lighthouse is the central point, and Pine Street, it seems to me we have mixed zoning on those blocks.
Right.
I believe that those multiple use buildings,
So you're on a block with mixed
multi-residential
zoning.
buildings should have one
Okay.
per.
But are you
unit.
saying citywide? So for instance, the Holman
Yes.
building, there's no, as far as I can think, there's no purely residential areas immediately adjacent. Are you saying the Holman building should have only one on that property?
I'm just putting the Holman building over here.
Okay.
I'm putting it over here. I'm talking about the rest of the community.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure I knew what you were.
And I would go citywide because if those places on David Avenue all go short-term, oh, good God.
I would recommend or suggest that most people who are doing this type of rental really want to stay in a traditional house. To go somewhere and stay in an apartment building, you probably know this more than I do, but that would not be my choice traveling. I'd want a house.
But currently, the ordinance limits one per parcel.
Yes.
So in some of these multiple units, there's probably more than one parcel involved
I think
in the
there's a
building.
handful. There's
Okay.
actually-
If it's-
There are some.
So one property per parcel in citywide. Is that
That's
what
in,
we're?
that's in the ordinance now.
So
And
no-
are you, sorry, are you?
Wait a minute.
As a-
I thought there was nothing to stop apartment buildings from being converted in total.
Yeah, what are you referring to, Tom? I'm not familiar with the
You have a
provision.
conversion
I thought the
ordinance.
current language had one per parcel, because we're talking, it talks about parcels opposed to housing units in the current ordinance.
The current ordinance
uses the word-
doesn't,
It doesn't specify.
yeah.
So it actually says only one per parcel?
Yes, it does.
Yes, it does.
My fear is that
Well, but, you
when you have
know,
a condominium, everybody has their own little
Parcel.
has their own little parcel.
yeah.
So if you were Machiavellian enough, you could think, well, I have my own parcel, my neighbor that I share a wall with has a parcel. So you could have 12 out of 15 condominium units meet that metric, which is one per parcel.
Well, we do have a cap at 260. I can't see all the folks running forward to get. I mean, we're at 180 now. We have another 30.
Yeah, it's
We're going to
not-
have like a handful,
Okay.
two dozen left.
So
It wouldn't hurt us.
one per
So-
property other than,
One-
but potentially the Holman building is what I heard. Potentially.
One property
Yes.
per parcel.
Yeah.
Okay, citywide. Okay, all right, we're agreed on that. Raising the TOT to 12%. I think we were all agreed on that last time.
No, that takes. Sorry, I jumped in.
Sorry, no,
No,
Go
it's
ahead,
all
go
right.
ahead.
I believe that takes a vote.
It does it. Oh, the people.
Yep, a vote of the people, and I think.
But is that a
No, but
recommendation that we're
we as a
making?
task force, are we recommending
Yes.
that? That's what I'm saying.
Yeah, no, I agree. I I have a hard time with that number going up.
12%.
Yeah, I do. I do, and
Okay.
I guess my Republican roots are showing up. I never thought I would say that in my life. My dad's like, yeah. No, yeah, that's just a sticky one.
And I-
know that we need to bring revenue to the city. I understand that.
And so that would apply to hotels too.
Correct, correct.
Hotels.
Okay. And that
Oh,
would
boy.
help with some of this enforcement stuff. I think that's kind of what we're trying to do, is to bring some money into the enforcement.
As I understand it,
mechanism.
TOT has to be decided, that goes in the general fund, and then
Tom?
that's correct. So it's really the fees and the licensing fees that can be applied to anything regarding short-term rentals or long-term rentals for that
So it
matter.
depends on what you're trying to accomplish. If you're trying to provide revenue to assist in the enforcement of whatever regulations you come up with, this is using a sledgehammer when a toothpick would work, because there are other ways to get revenue just from short-term rentals. I'm not saying I'm proposing it, but there are other ways to get revenues from short-term rentals. If you as a group propose increasing the TOT for all, you're going to have the chamber opposed to you, you're going to have the hoteliers opposed to you. It's
okay.
going to be a major
Okay.
war.
A major
I think
war.
that,
Got
yeah.
it. Okay.
And
Not-
within that, it was quickly recommended last time that if we were to have a task force, we contact all our short-term rental community to say, look, could you donate? Here's the website page, and donate $300, $500. We're going to put it toward the library. We're going to put it toward and so that little percentage can come directly to the community. Now we can deal with this later. It's not on this task force, but I would love to see something like that,
Okay.
so that our community could really give back to the community.
I would like to see something that gives the city sufficient money to hire a full-time code compliance officer to help us with perhaps the next one. if 2 verified complaints are proven. Our code compliance officer has way more to do than can be accomplished in a half day.
But I would want to add to that also, Robin, that over the last, since 2012 to now, there have been 2 parking and 6 noise complaints. So, and then the police officer, he's the chief that I spoke to, said we haven't seen a rise. So as far as the compliance, maybe we need to come up with our program first and then talk about hiring of a new full-time person. Because I think if we had a system in place that is effective, we're taking less work away. We're taking work away from the city and expecting that individuals are monitoring themselves.
How difficult is it to find members to serve on the various commissions and boards that help in the governing of Pacific Grove?
And I don't know about years past, but since I've been here, it's been a real problem.
Yeah.
I think it also, like real estate, goes through ebbs and flows. But right now, it's very, very difficult. We have people like Jeannie Anton who's walking out because we're already after 2 o'clock that have served on a variety of boards and commissions and are always available. And look how long you've served. And other people, it's very difficult.
Yeah. So I think this is a good idea in theory, but I'm not confident it will work unless. Well, I'm just not confident it'll work. I'm just stating my opinion. I would like some. I don't necessarily disagree with the police chief's assessment of complaints, and of course they must be accurate. But as we create things to make our short-term vacation rentals work. And as people in the community become aware, if we do these things, sending out notices, if we do what Palm Springs suggests, we're going to need somebody. And that somebody isn't going to be a volunteer.
Yeah.
So I'd like to see the program help to pay for itself.
So how about this then? Okay, so it seems as if we're not all agreed on what this document says. We're not all agreed on raising the TOT to 12%. As a task force, this is not a recommendation we're going to make to the city. Should we take a vote? Okay, everybody in favor of asking for the TOT to be raised?
Well,
because I think, Robin, what you're saying is we need to figure out some mechanism to pay for enforcement, but it doesn't necessarily have to be this 12%.
Correct.
Yeah.
And I have no problem with the 12%, but I don't want to get, what did you say? A tree instead of a toothpick.
Yeah.
If we can do a toothpick, I'd rather do the toothpick.
Yeah.
I'm in agreement
Okay.
with that for sure.
So should we take a vote?
So you would just raise fees, basically.
I would raise fees.
At an appropriate
Yeah.
level to
I would
support
raise
that.
fees.
Yeah.
So,
Then that's reasonable.
so are we then, we're going to eliminate this 12% thing, raising the TOT?
Maybe we could just reword that one. Tentative wording at the moment, raise the revenue to pay for,
Yes.
and leave on, how you do it at the moment, on
Yes.
open question.
Oh, that's
Yes,
a great
that's a
way
good
to
idea.
word it. Yeah.
Raise revenue. To pay for enforcement mechanism? Whatever that happens to be. Because it could include a hotline, it could include people, it could include all kinds of things.
And then at such time within that system, it'll be nice because then there'll be data to really look at, oh, here's a problem area. Oh, we don't really have a problem at all, et cetera. And-
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, so I think we're agreed on that.
Yeah, before we leave that,
Yeah.
I would just like to suggest that it's possible that the city could contract for those services as opposed to having an employee. which
Yes.
is typically more expensive.
Yes.
So,
And
Yes.
as you know, we've made a commitment, anything we do, every time we look at either refilling a position or adding a position, how can we do this most cost effectively? Is
Yes.
it contracting with somebody
Right.
else? Is it private-public partnership?
yeah,
Excellent.
Because the CalPERS is sometimes the last thing you
Oh,
should
my
do is
Lord.
create a new position.
sure.
Yeah. And Palm Springs has outsourced so much of this. They're a great example of.
Who has?
Palm Springs.
Springs.
I-
They've outsourced so much of
I
it.
don't think anybody is ahead of us in doing those kind of things. I mean, we're-
Oh, okay. Okay, great. Okay, the next thing is require professional property management if 2 verified complaints are proven. I'm not sure that we agreed on that.
Didn't we agree to just revocation?
I liked this one better than getting your permit pulled. Because if you have some issues, then it can go to professional property management who can handle it because you can't.
Well, the one thing that's going to happen if they engage a property manager is that the property manager is going to analyze the situation and see if the problems can be solved.
Right.
Now, sometimes the problem is the owner. And if the owner will not do what the property manager suggests or operate as rental in the way that the manager suggests it should be operated, then having the property manager is not going to help. But certainly getting the property manager involved will cause the situation to be analyzed to see if, if the situation can be saved. If not, then, revocation of the license is appropriate, I think.
So,
How do you feel
But
about
I
that,
think
Robin?
I would like to see the owner have the opportunity to get the property manager involved. I have been amazed in the last, how long has it been since the city hired Cal Muni? I have been amazed at the fact that I've gotten phone calls from people that said, the city is coming after me, and I didn't know I was supposed to sign up for TOT, and now what should I do? You should have signed up.
Sign up for TOT.
Signed up a long time ago. But the situation is, I can see that the situation is that if I was able to get my hands in it at this point, then I could probably salvage the situation. But not every time. There are people who have come to me for management, after they have screwed it up themselves, and it's so far gone that, it's a mess and it can't be saved.
Long-term.
Long-term and short-term.
Yeah.
But most of the time, having a manager in the situation, I think, can at least improve the situation. So I would say give the manager a shot.
So I agree with you on, but I think, Mark, when you said that the firm that you had hired to call the property manager or to call the contacts, when you guys did some kind of an audit and you called
We had a
the
person at the front
response
desk and
time,
police do it.
you said that 20% of the professionally managed
Didn't respond.
did not respond.
Right.
So then what sense does this make?
Okay, but all right, let's go back to that. Let's go back to that example. The way the city presented that was, it made it sound like that the city called the managers and said, we have a problem at such and such a house, and expected somebody to respond. But that wasn't the case. The city called the managers and said, we'd like to know what number, we'd like to have a list of your properties and what phone numbers you can be reached.
Okay.
Well, the managers that were called, I happened to be at my office the day they called, and I said, sure, I'll whip that right out to you. And I sent it off, and the city got it by email in about 10 minutes. So it wasn't a problem. But for the manager who was out of the country, when that call came in, the clerical staff that took that call did not understand that was what the city was trying to make it to be. The clerical staff did not understand that it was something that had to be done right now. They put it on the desk of the property manager, and when she got back from wherever she was, she addressed it. But it wasn't quite the way it was presented.
But on the other hand, so then what would have happened if, when the city called, they were actually calling with a complaint, and the manager was out of the country or whatever? So what would have happened in that case?
All the property managers have what's called either local contacts or house managers that are on call for those calls. And the city has those numbers on the licenses. So if the local contact or the house manager is called, they respond and go deal with the problem. But whoever is called has got to understand that there's a problem to respond to. In this test that the city ran, it wasn't quite presented
Yeah.
that
Didn't
way.
know that.
So,
Good point.
yeah.
Well,
Thank you for the clarification.
Thank you.
I didn't, yeah,
So,
I
I
remember
think-
that discussion.
I think what might happen is if you required professional property management and you have owners who are doing their own management of their short-term rental, I think what might happen is that they may opt not to do professional management. Number one, because it costs a lot of money. It's, what is it, like 20% or something? It's a huge percentage.
Well, to not commit a violation of the antitrust laws, I declined to answer that
Yeah.
question.
Yeah.
But there's...
But somewhere between 15 and 40%.
Yeah. So it's a huge part of the take, and I bet most people will probably say no. Then the other thing is, I think there are requirements in property management that not everybody is comfortable with, like you need to have a big screen TV, or you need to have a king size bed, or you need to have, there's all those little requirements of professional property managers that most people will not opt to comply with because it's expensive. So require professional property management if 2 verified complaints are proven. I'm not sure that's going to work. I think what would happen if there are 2 verified complaints that have been proven, I think the license is just rescinded for the year.
Can they apply again?
Yeah,
Always.
sure.
I like that. I like that because one of the things that worries me that we discussed at our first meeting is that those who manage short-term vacation rentals do not have to have a license. So
Right.
there's nothing to regulate
Right,
them.
right.
So I like your suggestion.
Okay. So what about that? We just rescind the license for the year, so it's just canceled. The license is canceled if there are 2 verified complaints.
I'm okay with that.
All right, mine too. So I put a star by it.
2 verified complaints.
Oh, my favorite one.
And we have only a few more, I've got a
Okay.
council meeting to prepare for,
Yeah,
so I've
we're
got to...
jumping into the next. Require garages and driveways be made available to the renter.
Instead of, can I make a suggestion? Since we do only have a limited time left, can we decide what you want to see accomplished before next week so we can ensure we keep making progress?
I think we should keep going through this list to see all the things we can agree on.
And
I think first we go with all the points of agreement.
And are people available next Wednesday?
Yes.
Yes.
I will be here. I will
Yep.
make myself available. I'm supposed to be in Lynn. I'll be here.
Right, so
I think the number one, getting the cap and agreeing on that is pretty huge. I think that will really place some ease on.
So I think Alka's suggesting we go ahead and, Annalisa, and go to the garages and driveways issue today. So what would it be?
If
People
we're
want
ready to it. If
People
we're
want to
ready.
agree to that, not agree to that?
Well, that was my idea.
I know, sorry.
I
Okay, you can change
Okay.
your mind.
Well, I think
No, I haven't
it's
changed my mind.
reflecting on my conversation with the city attorney earlier. It is one way, and an acceptable way, I understand, of limiting the number of occupants
Yes.
in a building,
Yeah.
particularly in Pacific Grove.
We do that with our long-term rentals. In long-term rentals, obviously we are, the same as short-term rentals, we're subject to the occupancy standards that are agreeable to the California Department of Fair Employment and Housing.
Right.
But we are able to limit the number of vehicles at a property.
Yeah.
And that's a really easy way to limit the number of bodies.
Yeah. See, I think this would take care of a lot of Tom's issues too. If we could
There's no
limit the
impact on
number,
our street. They don't have driveways.
if we could limit the number of people per property, I think that would limit parking issues.
That's
that
a
would
totally,
limit noise
that-
issues.
I'm not saying that's, but that's a totally different one than this one.
I get it, and we should talk about that.
Yeah.
That should be one of the things that we'll talk about next time is the number of people.
Yeah.
Can we put a limit on the number of people?
Well,
per-
you can't. The fair housing laws apply to short-term rentals or long-term rentals.
Oh,
It's a
that's what you're
residential
saying.
use of
Oh,
a
I see.
property.
Yeah.
You're talking about, renting a house.
I see.
And the fair housing laws apply, so you cannot be more restrictive than 2 per bedroom plus 1.
Even on a discretionary license.
It doesn't make any difference. We're talking now about
Okay.
federal and state fair housing
Okay.
laws.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Okay.
That's what I know.
I have already gotten legal opinions on this, so I promise you. In fact, I will tell you that there was recently a fair housing expert who contacted me to talk about this particular subject because she was so shocked that she had been a speaker at a national conference for vacation rental managers, and she said, I can't believe that I got in this room full of 400 vacation rental managers, and they did not realize that the fair housing laws applied to them.
Oh, yeah.
You know, they thought they were exempt.
It's all of it. No, it's all of it.
She said, you know, what was happening there? I don't know. But yes, the fair housing laws apply. So 2 per bedroom plus 1.
2 people, 2 adults?
2 people, two persons.
Okay.
2 per bedroom plus 1. So if you have a
That's the fair
1-bedroom,
housing law.
that's a fair housing law. So, and please understand that that's not a law. That is a
Standard, right?
standard that has been adopted by, well, HUD at the federal level, 2 per bedroom, and then 2 per bedroom plus 1 by the California Department of Fair Employment and Housing. And in fact, there was a property manager in Monterey who just negotiated a $25,000 settlement about this very subject because they had a 2 per bedroom standard at a 2-bedroom apartment complex, and they were considered to be out of compliance because they did not allow 2 per bedroom plus 1.
So it's not a law, but it is,
It's an accepted standard, and it's considered, the 2 per bedroom plus 1 is considered to be a safe harbor.
so, but can complaint only come from the person who's renting, or? no,
It could
not-
come from...
Can anybody?
It could come from anybody.
A neighbor?
So, a neighbor, or in this case of the Monterey situation, the complaint was filed by a San Jose fair housing advocacy group called Project Sentinel. And they watch out for fair housing issues.
Is it a maximum or a minimum?
That's the
Minimum.
most restrictive that you can be.
Yeah.
So in other words, there's no maximum, but that's the minimum number of people that you could have and not be considered to be in violation of fair housing.
So we could have restriction as long as we don't violate that standard.
Yes,
Correct.
yes.
Does that code recommendation define bedroom? That's become an issue here.
Well, and that is another issue.
A living room with a pull-out
Yeah,
sofa, is that a
yeah.
bedroom?
Well, I mean, there's not really case law on that, but, you know,
I
who
think
wants to be the
there- I
test
think
case?
there
I
is.
don't.
No, I think there is, and I can do a little homework and
So
fill it
a
in.
2-bedroom apartment essentially should have allowed 6 people.
5. 2 per bedroom plus 1. So 5 people.
2 bedrooms each.
2 bedrooms,
Two
each
people
with
per
2 and
bedroom.
1 more person, so 5.
Oh, so it's,
No more restrictive than 5,
okay.
yeah.
Thank you.
Not that, not that they have to, you know, not that they can't say no more than, they can't say, I won't take 6. You could say, I won't take 6 or 7 or 8, but you can't be more restrictive than 5.
I see.
Less than.
Okay.
So
I've
Did I
got
miss
to-
anything?
I've got to
I know
take off.
you've got to go. Should we try, does everybody have a couple minutes to try and get through the list while Tom
Next week.
goes? Next week I'll be on a time constraint
When
like
do I?
that. Yeah, I'll have
Well,
to be.
out of here too?
Yeah, because I have Thanksgiving fun to go to. But we did it before when someone, are we good to wrap it?
That's up to you.
Okay. Look at that, Tom, nobody wants to talk about it here.
So what did you guys decide about the driveways?
We didn't.
No, we didn't just, I'm a no on it. I know you have to go, but if I may, I'm just going to address it. I was with a group of moms and they said, wait a minute, so the people that are on your task force must not live in PG. I'm like, no, of course they do. And they go, well, there's no storage. There's no garage. There's no storage at all in any of our houses. So we use our garage for the extra Costco, the kayaks, the
They're missing the point that the vacation rental owners don't have the storage that a long-term resident has. A long-term resident may well use as a garage for storage. The vacation rental house is furnished minimally for vacation rental. There shouldn't be anything in the garage
This is
any
lock
any
off.
boat parked in the driveway.
Yeah, the boat parking driveway is great. You need parking. But somebody's personal item